We left Bulgaria in tears. We all left Bulgaria with tears in our eyes.
The Jews of Bulgaria love Bulgaria because the Bulgarian people love the Jews.
I am sure that the Bulgarian proved that there was a way to stand up against the Germans.
Bulgaria, a small European country nestling in the Balkans, a pro-Nazi kingdom during World War II. Its government made a pact with the Third Reich, but its people struggled to avoid sending the Jews to their deaths. A unique episode, an unknown story, an extraordinary saga.
People started to cry. They cried and began singing Bulgarian songs, as if saying goodbye.
In March 1941, Bulgaria signed a military treaty with Nazi Germany and became its ally. In order to guarantee the deal that the Bulgarians would enter this pact, Hitler persuaded the Romanian government to return the fertile Dobruja region that Bulgaria lost after World War I. Dobruja was returned to Bulgaria, and the agreement with Germany was signed. In March 1941, the German army entered Bulgaria, using it as a springboard from which to attack Greece and Yugoslavia. The German victory was swift and complete. The Bulgarians were promptly rewarded. Germany ripped Thrace away from Greece and Macedonia from Yugoslavia, and placed both regions under Bulgarian control. Thus, with Dobruja annexed to Bulgaria and Thrace and Macedonia firmly under its control, Bulgaria was swept up by a surge of enthusiasm and patriotism. The Bulgarian parliament cheered the Prime Minister after he proclaimed the establishment of Greater Bulgaria. The pro-Nazi organizations that had emerged in Bulgaria celebrated. Streets throughout the country were named after Hitler and Mussolini. Boris III, King of Bulgaria, who authorized the Prime Minister to sign the agreement with Germany, was now referred to as King Unifier. On January the 23rd, 1941, Bulgaria adopted the Law for the Defense of the Nation, an anti-Jewish law modeled after the Nazi racial laws.
Bulgaria knew very well that if they wanted something from Germany, they had to give something in return. So even before Bulgaria was asked by the Nazis to do anything about the Jews, they did it on their own will. They promulgated the Law for the Defense of the Nation, which was actually a very close copy of the Nuremberg racial laws against the Jews. It implied that the Jews should wear a yellow patch. Actually, it was a very small yellow star, which was the smallest in Europe. There were signs placed on Jewish houses, signs placed on Jewish businesses. There was a curfew imposed upon the Jews. They couldn't exert quite a few professions. They could not be doctors, they couldn't own industries, they couldn't own land. There were a lot of restrictions against the Jews. Most of them were carried out, quite a few were not.
The Law for the Defense of the Nation would leave a stain on Bulgaria. Hundreds of telegrams and letters began to pour in, to the Prime Minister, to the Speaker of Parliament, to ministers and to other government leaders in Sofia. This tidal wave of protest was massive and unrelenting. It came from all walks of life. The Writers' Society, the Doctors' Union, the Bar Association, groups of artists, textile workers, carpenters, the Merchants' Union, the Shoemakers' Guild, railroad employees, residents of Sofia's 3rd district, leaders of the Bulgarian Church, Communist Party activists, even farmers from Bulgaria's heartland. they all dispatched strong-worded petitions to cabinet ministers and members of parliament.
On that day, when the law came out, I was in 12th grade, the last year in our high school. My father took me to school so I wouldn't be embarrassed. For the first time, I had to wear the Jewish star. When school was over, two of my classmates asked me, "Annie, how are you getting home?" And I told them I was going the same way. "Oh, we just happened to be going that way too." And so one was on one side and the other on the other, and they walked me all the way home.
The hardest part was how to enter my class. How do I go in? On purpose, I came a little late. Just a little, so that no one would be left out in the yard and I wouldn't feel embarrassed. Then once everyone is inside, I could go in. So I went to school, entered the classroom and was shocked. My entire class was standing, and though I was the only Jew in the class, everyone was standing, wearing a yellow star on their shirts. They made them out of a yellow pumpkin.
My father owned a men's clothing store in Sofia, and since the law for the defense of the nation set a limit on the number of stores Jews could own, he had to give it up to a Bulgarian within a certain specified amount of time. Now, he managed, through some friends, to get in touch with a Bulgarian whom we had never met before, who was interested in having this certain kind of a store. And so my father passed on the store to him, with all the merchandise, without any inventory or signing any sort of an agreement, nothing. Then, what was a real mystery for me was that every beginning of the month, my father would go to the train station during the hours that we Jews were allowed out on the streets, and he would meet this Bulgarian there, and they would go to a quiet corner. The man would slip some money in my dad's pocket and return back to Sofia on the next train.
So I was working for a man called Boris Bellef. When I wore the yellow star to work, he'd say, "Take it off. Here, I'll watch out for you. Take it off."
I do not think that the Germans had a very strong influence on the Bulgarian society. How shall I say, give their the anti-Semitism onto the Bulgarian society. I don't think they had much success in that, no.
רק לאחר המלחמה, כשראינו סרטים ויומנים, מה קרה במזרח אירופה.
Only when the war was over and we saw films about what happened to the Jews in Eastern and Western Europe, and we saw the big yellow star they had to wear that was made out of cloth that was attached to their clothing, only then did we realize our cute little yellow star button was actually bearable.
Despite the open and unprecedented public opposition to the anti-Semitic law, Sofia's heads of government continued to tighten the oppressive measures against the Jews. In the summer of '41, the Bulgarian government established a special commissariat for Jewish affairs. Its purpose was to deal with the Jewish question and enforce the harsh provisions of the law for the defense of the nation. The headquarters of the commissariat were based in a requisitioned building walking distance from the parliament in Sofia. Its 120 employees were under the command of Alexander Bellef, a young lawyer and a rising star in Bulgarian politics. The Germans could not have asked for a better servant.
On March 6, 1943, a man called Velkov arrived at Kyustendil. This man was one of the higher-ranked officials from the Commissariat of Jewish Affairs. This man came to organize and to arrange for the eviction of the Jews and then storing them in the tobacco warehouses.
Kyustendil. a small city about 80 kilometers from Sofia, located in the center of a rural part of southeastern Bulgaria. This pleasant city, lush with greenery, a cross between a small European town and a Bulgarian village, came to be known as Bulgaria's fruit orchard.
Velkov
went to Mikhail Abadjiev, a lawyer, with a demand to give him the authority over all the tobacco warehouses. Abadjiev told him he couldn't unless he told him why. They had an argument, and then finally Velkov revealed that in a few days Bulgarian Jews, at first 20,000, were going to be sent to Poland, to the concentration camps.
By March 1943, Nazi Germany had already succeeded in destroying over half of the Jews of Europe within the framework of what was called the final solution. 4 million Jews from all over Europe were sent to the German death camps, most of which were established in Poland. Polish and Russian Jews were slaughtered wherever they lived. Jews from Germany, Austria, Czechoslovakia, Holland, Belgium and France were deported to Poland and massacred in the death camps of Chełmno, Belzec, Sobibor and Treblinka. Upon completion of the huge gas chambers and crematoria at Auschwitz, the German death machine went into high gear and the death industry reached its terribly efficient climax.
Abadjiev החזיק את הסוד בליבו.
Abadjiev kept the secret, but he couldn't bear it for long, since he had a very dear friend, my brother, Buko Lazarov.
Mikhail
Abadjiev searched for a way to tell my brother in which to reveal the terrible news. He invited all his friends, including my brother and his wife Anka, to a party in his house. And at the party, after everyone was there, he took my brother aside and told him that he was asked to clear out the tobacco warehouses in order to temporarily store the Jews there until they'd be sent off to the concentration camps. My brother felt terrible. He anxiously waited for the party to end because he couldn't tell anyone there the terrible news. It was late at night. There was a curfew for the Jews and we weren't allowed out in the streets for any reason after 9 o'clock. My brother ignored the restriction, and after midnight, out he went to Buko Konfortov, the chairman of the Jewish community. They discussed their options for immediate action. There was no time.
Alexander Bellef learned first-hand of the Nazi secret plans for the destruction of the Jews. In January of 1942 he was sent to Berlin with the Wannsee Conference convened to decide on the implementation of the final solution to the Jewish problem. And so several months later the German foreign minister instructed his staff to begin sending the Jews of Hungary, Denmark and Bulgaria to their deaths. The Bulgarian Interior Minister, Peter Gabrowski, authorized the deportation to Poland of the Thracian and Macedonian Jews who had been denied Bulgarian citizenship. Adolf Eichmann sent Obersturmführer Theodor Dannecker, an SS officer responsible for the murder of some 700,000 Jews in Europe, to Sofia. On February the 22nd, 1943, the first document outlining how the final solution would be implemented in this region was typed at the headquarters of the Commissariat for Jewish Affairs in Sofia. It was a unique agreement signed by Alexander Bellef on behalf of Bulgaria and by Obersturmführer Theodor Dannecker for Germany. This agreement was the only one ever signed between Nazi Germany and another country concerning the deportation of Jews to death camps in Poland.
Dannecker had already quite a record of sending the Jews from other countries in Europe to their deaths. He came to Bulgaria and he met with Bellef. knowing that Bulgaria would not object to the deportation of the Jews from Thrace and Macedonia, whose number was about 12,000. And then Bellef told Dannecker, why take 12,000? Why shouldn't we round the figure, make it 20,000? And we shall give you 8,000 Jews from all Bulgaria. Now there was a very dramatic moment, because the original agreement spoke only about sending the Jews from Thrace and Macedonia, from the new Bulgarian territories. And when they signed the agreement, Bellef struck out the line saying Thrace and Macedonia. So the agreement was about sending, in the first stage, 20,000 Jews. And right away, preparations started in order to deport all these Jews.
One morning, on the way to school with my backpack, like always, a Bulgarian soldier yelled, "Go back home, there's no school today." After I got home, my friend Izzy, who lived next door, pardon me, this is very emotional for me. He said, "Sachko, the Germans are going to get us. The Germans are going to kill us." And then I looked out the window and we saw many people in camps of 2 or 3 coming from the direction of the Jewish quarter, and they looked terrified, crying, horrified.
On March the 11th, 1943, at 4 in the morning, they knocked loudly on the door. We were expecting something to happen, and when we opened the door, they told us to go out quickly. We were going to work. We went out. It was raining heavily, rain and snow. It was terribly cold. We stayed outside for about 4 hours. At around 8:30, we started walking. We got to the train station, and when we got there, we heard the mayor yelling at his men, "Search everything, find it, beat them. Don't be afraid to beat them." The train started to move. It was already dark.
A few weeks after the start of the expulsion campaign, death transports of Thracian and Macedonian Jews arrived at Treblinka. 11,343 men, women and children were killed by asphyxiation in gas chambers in the German death camp located on Polish soil. The Jews of Kyustendil were among the 8,000 Jews of old Bulgaria that Bellef included in his first expulsion plan.
On March 7th, rumors began to spread about the deportation of Jews from Thrace and Macedonia, and that we might be next. On the 8th, someone said that at night a train came through the Kyustendil train station, that from the cattle cars people were screaming, "Bread, water."
Early in the morning, very early, the Jewish committee of Kyustendil met in the synagogue. My brother called for immediate action to be taken. They decided to organize a group of distinguished non-Jewish community leaders. The head of the group was Peter Michalov, who was a friend of my brother. They used to live in the same house.
My father was a member of the Jewish committee in Kyustendil, and he was very aware of what was going on. There was a leak that the trains were at the stations and ready, and the warehouses were cleared and ready, and that we were going to be taken within 24 hours.
Public figures from Kyustendil refused to remain indifferent to these events. In less than 48 hours, a group organized in the town determined to act on behalf of the Jews.
One day, my husband met at the town square Buku Lazarov, who broke down crying and said they will arrest all the Jews and put them in Fernandez tobacco warehouse. My husband told them not to worry and that he was going to Sofia and will take care of it.
Една вечер пристигна една доста внушителна делегация. Те се промъкнаха.
That night, a large delegation came to our house. They got through somehow, although they were not allowed on the streets. They didn't come up to the second floor. They stayed downstairs and talked with my father. I, a curious child, listened from the top of the stairs. They asked my father to put together a group of prominent citizens from Kyustendil that would go to Sofia and try to do something about it.
Arsen Swichmezov, a businessman, Vladimir Kurtev, a politician, Ivan Momchilov, a lawyer, and Peter Mikhalev, a parliamentarian, were the 4 Bulgarians who formed the Kyustendil delegation. They left from the same railway station at which the infamous death train had already arrived. Unswayed by the dangers inherent in their decision, the 4 men boarded the last train to Sofia late in the evening. Their goal was to meet with Dimitar Peshev, the highest Kyustendil representative in the capital, a former Minister of Justice now serving as Deputy Chairman of the Bulgarian Parliament. The following morning, the 4 made their way to Peshev's Sofia apartment. The expulsion of the Jews of Bulgaria was to begin the evening of that very day, March 9th. The Kyustendil mission had less than 12 hours to achieve the impossible, make the government cancel the expulsion order.
Peshev learned about the forthcoming deportation only in the morning of the deportation day. At the beginning, he did not believe. He said, I would have known about it. How come there is such a plan and me not knowing about it? But when he learned about it, he decided to act immediately.
In his diary concerning the events of that day, Peshev wrote, "The first thing that had to be done immediately was to meet the Minister of the Interior, who was responsible for Jewish affairs, and to make him understand that we could not accept the measures being taken against the Jews, and that we would take steps against these measures." The Minister of the Interior, Gabrovsky, was in the Parliament building that day. I could not keep silent concerning such important events affecting the present as well as the future. Silence went against my conscience. I felt responsible for everything that was happening. A criminal act from a legal and moral standpoint was about to be committed, and I decided to act. The Minister of the Interior agreed to Peshev's urgent request and met him in his office. Peshev told him of the information he had received. The minister firmly denied the existence of any plan to expel the Jews of Kyustendil or other Jews from Bulgaria. Time was running out. Peshev hurried back to his office to make an urgent phone call to the governor of the Kyustendil region. The governor confirmed that he had received a secret order to arrest Jewish residents and detain them in the tobacco warehouses next to the railway station.
On March 9th, we woke up in the morning. Father went to the synagogue, leaving instructions for me and my mother how to pack our luggage.
At home, we knew pretty early that something was about to happen. The entire Jewish community in Kyustendil started preparing for the trip to the camps. They started packing big bags, big knapsacks full of clothes and food for the journey.
The panic was huge. My mother had to make backpacks out of curtains and pack the least amount of luggage to be taken. They announced a curfew starting at 10, and we knew exactly what this curfew was for.
Plovdiv was the second largest city in Bulgaria, whose Jews, along with those of Kyustendil and Jews from several other towns, were included in Bellev's expulsion order for that day.
They came to our house at 3 or 4 in the morning and ordered everybody to pack up to 5 kilos of clothing in a small bag or a suitcase, and to be ready for a short trip.
They brought us here. There were many people. I wasn't very young. I was 17, and I remember everything very well. Lots of people, all pale, all terrified. We were sure we were being sent to our deaths.
The news that the Jews of Plovdiv had been arrested and were being held in a nearby school made its way through the alleys of the city and ultimately reached the head of the church in Plovdiv, Bishop Kirill, or the Metropolitan, as he is called in Bulgarian. The news shocked the bishop, who took immediate action. He dispatched a telegram to King Boris begging him to spare the Jews, left his house and hurried to the nearby school.
At noon, I saw a dignified-looking priest, that later I found out he was the Metropolitan Kirill. He blessed those who gathered in the yard and tried to reassure them. Then I saw, with my own eyes, this dignified priest, though being stopped by the police from entering the yard, dart to the fence, climb over it to speak to the crowd. He said, "My children, don't fear. We will not let them take you out of this country. And if they do so, I personally am going with you."
At 3 in the afternoon, following meetings with highly influential individuals in the capital, the members of the Kyustendil delegation arrived at the parliament. Bellef introduced them to several parliament members who had heard first-hand about what was happening in Kyustendil. Time was very precious. He had to act before it became too late. Prime Minister Bogdan Filov was in the building that day. Bellef hurried to his office requesting an urgent meeting, but the Prime Minister refused. About 10 members of Parliament already gathered in Bellef's office. The only option they could think of was to storm the office of Interior Minister Gabrovsky and make it very clear to him that they were determined to resist the deportation of the Jews.
Gabrovsky felt that Bellef and his cronies, his friends who came with him, were ready to go into a fight in Parliament against the deportation. And that was the moment when Gabrovsky and Filov asked for the decision of the king.
We were supposed to be at the train station in the afternoon. There we were, ready with our suitcases, leaving our house. Our Bulgarian neighbors sobbing, becoming very emotional because we were leaving. And on the way to the station, someone came running to tell us to turn back. There had been a change.
Gabrovsky returned to his office and announced to the small group that the expulsion order had been cancelled. Bellef, along with his parliament friends, flatly refused to leave the premises until they were completely convinced that the order had been revoked. For verification, Bellef phoned the Kyustendil district governor, while his friends rushed to contact other cities from which the Jews were to be deported.
When we heard that the deportation had been postponed, such joyfulness broke out, not only among the Jews, but also among much of the Bulgarian population of Kyustendil.
Then they came. The door burst open and they said, "You are free. Go." That was a moment I don't know how to describe it. A miracle. Maybe a miracle. They gathered us all, and one of the policemen in civilian clothes read out the order. As decreed by King Boris III, you are being freed. You are free to return to your homes. We started shouting, "Hooray, hooray, we are free." It was as if we had been given our lives back.
I saw Jews with backpacks running down the street shouting, "We are free." That is something that I will never forget. We are free.
I think the 9th of March was a turning point in King Boris's policy. From the start until that day, he had been a very loyal and subdued vassal of the Germans, who did everything Germany could expect from him. He passed the law for defense of the nation. He created the Commissariat for Jewish Questions. He appointed the Commissar for Jewish Questions, who was an ardent Nazi. He sent the Jews of Thrace of Macedonia and Macedonia to their death, and he actually approved the sending of 8,000 Bulgarian Jews as well. But on the 9th of March 1943, when he had to take a decision, he changed his policy. And from this day, he realized that as a king of the Bulgarians, he cannot carry out such a policy.
The happiness was so overwhelming at home. Those were days of food shortage, but every family had some sugar, cheese, things set aside. So my mother, of blessed memory, started cooking and baking pastries and things like that, and shared it with our Bulgarian neighbors.
They were all against this brutal treatment of the Jews because it was against their heart, against their feeling, against their belief to harm other people who lived with them, who had who were like Bulgarians.
I will never forget how right after that it was Passover. It was the happiest celebration of Passover that we ever had.
Pesha was not very happy after the deportation was cancelled. He feared that was perhaps only delayed, and in a week, couple of weeks, who knows, it might happen again. Therefore, he decided to take a step forward to prevent that from happening. And he wrote a letter to the Prime Minister, which I believe should be taught in schools.
Dear Prime Minister, it appears that certain steps have recently been taken by the authorities, steps that indicate that the new decrees against the citizens of Jewish origin are being discussed and carried out. We cannot believe that the expulsion of these individuals from Bulgaria was indeed planned. The deportation of the Jews is unthinkable. It will brand Bulgaria with an undeserved stain that would void all her moral standing. We cannot share any responsibility for these utterly cruel measures which might lead to an accusation of mass murder. After composing this letter, Bellef rushed along the corridors of Parliament. Within 48 hours he managed to obtain signatures from more than a third of the pro-fascist majority members. He didn't wait for the promised signatures of other parliamentarians and rejected requests by opposition members to sign. 43 members of parliament, elected representatives from towns and villages throughout Bulgaria, joined Bellef's parliamentary battle by signing the letter.
I would say that the entire Bulgarian example raises very sad questions about other countries in Europe, because it proves that when they wanted to stand up to Hitler, they could have.
Prime Minister Filov was enraged when he received the letter. This was a virtual rebellion. He consulted with the king and began applying pressure on House members until he succeeded in passing a censure of Bellef at a meeting of the majority group. At a plenary session of Parliament, in a hurried and illegal vote, Bellef was removed from his position as Deputy Speaker and thus lost his high standing and political clout. The last-minute cancellation of the deportation order was a stunning blow for Alexander Bellef. He immediately resigned from his post, but was soon persuaded by his German colleagues to cancel his resignation so that he could finish the job he had begun. Less than 3 weeks after the cancellation of the deportation, King Boris was summoned to a meeting with Hitler at the Eagle's Nest, the Führer's mountain retreat. German Minister von Ribbentrop demanded that the king explain why the Jews of Bulgaria had not been deported to Poland. Boris claimed that up to now he had agreed to deport only the Jews of Thrace and Macedonia. As to the Jews of Bulgaria, he needed them as a labor force to pave roads and lay railway tracks. Upon his return to Bulgaria, Boris met with Prime Minister Filov and Interior Minister Gabrovsky. Filov quotes in his diary what the king told them. We must mobilize the able Jewish men into labor units and thus avoid the deportation of the Jews from the old boundaries to Poland.
The German reaction to the king's statement about paving roads came in two stages. The first was the spontaneous reaction of von Ribbentrop in Berchtesgaden. When the king told him about paving roads, he said, there is one solution to the Jewish question, and this is the radical solution, which means the final solution, of course. And the second reaction was that they sent their secret services to check what was happening.
We would wake up early in the morning. They'd assigned us a certain area that had to be dug up. We'd dig up the dirt and carry it over to where the railroad track was being built. At 11 o'clock, 11:30 the latest, we were already finished, sometimes even earlier.
On Sunday, our day off there would be no work. So on Sundays we would use the time to do our laundry and chores. It took some time until the mail started coming regularly, and since our parents didn't know what our living conditions were like, they sent us care packages, just like we send our sons in the army today. Packages with food and whatever.
When my father came home for a winter break, once he even came during the summer, he was not very thin, he was not starved, he just needed some rest, a warm bed, a hot shower, but otherwise he would tell us that obviously home was preferable, but that the life there was not that bad at all.
The treatment was fair. Possibly here and there would be some sadistic officer who would do something, but where I served, they treated us very well.
When my father came home from the camps in the winters, he could not go to work because his store was taken away from him. He would sit with his friends and they'd tell stories. And since there were hours that we weren't allowed outside, we would sit at home. They sat around, played cards, complained, everything that one could do during wartime.
We would take photographs with our officers. They were farmers who were not aware of all this anti-Semitism. They had to be indoctrinated with anti-Semitism, though they never felt it.
And this is what a secret report from the German Security Service stated. The efficiency of the Jewish work in construction of roads and railroads has been minimal so far. In some of the camps, the Jews work for a few hours a day and can lead very pleasant lives. The Bulgarian government uses the inclusion of Jews in the work effort as the overall reason against the German demand for their deportation to the east in order to prevent its execution on time.
Bellef did not give up. His new plan was much more ambitious. This time he didn't plan to send only 8,000 Bulgarian Jews. He wanted to send to Poland all 50,000 of them. And that plan was divided in two stages. First stage, 25,000 Jews from the capital city of Sofia, and a few days or weeks, couple of weeks later, the 25,000 remaining in the different cities and towns in the provinces. Everything was prepared in utmost secrecy. Barges and boats were brought to the ports on the Danube River to take the Jews straight into Vienna and from there to Poland.
The Secretary of the Commissar for Jewish Affairs, Alexander Bellef, was Liliana Panitsa, a young Bulgarian woman from Varna who began her career in Sofia as an ordinary secretary. Panitsa owed her promotion to Bellef, who had favored her since she began working with him in the Bulgarian Interior Ministry.
Liliana Panitsa was a very beautiful young woman. She became the secretary of Alexander Bellef. She was obsessed with him and she became his secret lover. On the other hand, she was a woman of high moral principles. She could not understand why did she have to work in this ministry of evil, sending Jews to their death. And she was completely torn between her loyalty to the government her love to her lover, and her personal feelings and principles. So she would work all day long, typing all these secret orders whose goal was the annihilation of the Jews. In the evening, she would spend hours with her lover, with Alexander Bellef, and later she would run to the private homes of the leaders of the Jewish community in Sofia and warn them about what was going to happen to them and advise them how to act in order to save their lives.
My mother said she knows Panitsa. There were rumors that Panitsa was helping the Jews.
The first deportation, she tried to warn them. And then, with the second deportation attempt, she told Dr. Levi from the Jewish community to let the people know what to expect. She suffered from the situation. She really suffered.
Liliana Panitsa knew about the new deportation plan, and she was the one who went secretly to the homes of the leaders of the Jewish community of Sofia and informed them that in a few days they are going to be deported to Poland. And this time, all of them.
3 days before the 24th of May, we received a notice announcing that we had to leave Sofia. 20 kilos of luggage per person. Obviously, it caused a commotion within the Jewish community. The first thought was that we were being sent to the concentration camps in Poland.
Как да ви кажа, имахме български семейства, които дойдоха, носиха ни ядене в София, защото имахме 3 дни.
What can I tell you? There were Bulgarian family friends in Sofia who came a long way just to bring us food. We only had 3 days to prepare for this deportation, and those Bulgarian friends who came from far away brought us homemade food, helped us prepare and pack, reminding us of what we would need. We were in complete panic.
May 24th is a Bulgarian national holiday, a day of culture and education dedicated to two saints, Saint Cyril and Saint Methodius, inventors of the Cyrillic alphabet. On this day, thousands of students gathered in Alexander Nevsky Square to participate in a traditional prayer conducted by the head of the Bulgarian Church in Sofia, Bishop Stefan. On this very day, the deportation of the Jews of Sofia was to begin.
The Jews of Sofia were thrown into a state of disarray and panic. They didn't have somebody to turn to. Peshev had been the leader of the move to prevent the deportation in March 1943, was now out of his job. He couldn't help them. Other leaders were only leaders of the opposition. There was no connection with the king. And finally the Jews decided to turn to the church.
Stefan was one of the most respected Bulgarian religious leaders. He had received a doctorate in philosophy at the University of Geneva and had a humanistic world-view. Stefan strongly objected to the alliance between Bulgaria and Nazi Germany. Responding to the threat against the Jews, he had already taken action by opening the churches in Sofia for mass baptism of the Jews, with the hope that those who had converted would not be deported. Interior Minister Gabrovsky was furious at Stefan's baptismal initiative and issued an unprecedented order to close the city's churches. Stefan firmly refused to obey. When all of the members of the High Committee of the Bulgarian Church, the Holy Synod, unanimously declared their support for Stefan, the Ministry of the Interior backed down and the order was rescinded.
Stefan not only objected to the cabinet, but he also succeeded to carry out with him the entire leadership of the Bulgarian Church. This was a dramatic and a unique confrontation between church and state about the steps taken against the Jews, and it happened in no other place throughout Europe.
I went out for a walk around the neighborhood. It was Sunday. Also, it was a holiday. Then I heard the technology students playing music on their way to the parade in the center of Sofia. Then someone said to me, "Your people are gathering." So I went to the synagogue in the Jewish neighborhood. People were already there, and Rabbi Daniel Tzion arrived, a very interesting person. Then there was a prayer at the synagogue. Not everyone could get inside. I also was outside. When prayer was over and people began to leave the synagogue, they started to talk among themselves, saying, "We have to protest. We have to demonstrate."
Laura Fahy, one of the women present, suggested to turn to Bishop Stefan in this moment of total despair. She knew the head of the church in Sofia well and requested that the two Sofia chief rabbis, Rabbi Asher Hananel and Rabbi Daniel Tzion, join her on this last-minute mission. Stefan had prepared for the prayer rally and was already on his way to the Alexander Nevsky church when the rabbinical delegation appeared before him. He heard about deportation decrees, raids and arrests. He announced that the rally could wait, returned to his home, phoned the palace and left an urgent message for the king, whose whereabouts surprisingly no one knew. The bitterness and the fear, Stefan recalled in his memoirs, painted on the faces of my visitors because of this cruel persecution, taking place on the brightest day of our homeland, brought me to tears. Stefan pledged his full support to the members of the delegation and advised them to protest against the deportation plan. Only then did he hurry to the rally. The cabinet ministers were impatiently waiting on the podium at the crowded square of Alexander Nevsky Church when an agitated Stefan finally arrived. He stepped forward, conducted the prayer, then turned to the crowd to deliver the traditional sermon. But this time he added the following: "This year our celebration is flawed by the persecution undertaken against the Jews. Our ceremony this year is not in keeping with tradition because the Jewish students are absent. From this rostrum I send an appeal to the state authorities to not enslave the freedom-loving, democratic and friendly Bulgarian spirit to foreign indoctrination, influences and orders."
Водещата личност на българския църковен живот.
The primary figure in Bulgarian religious life was the head of the church, Patriarch Stefan. If it wasn't for him, nobody would have done a thing. I still can't believe how much courage that man had by saying that a ban would be put on anyone who dare harm Bulgarian Jews. Can you imagine how that influenced the Prime Minister at this time, 1943? How it tied the hands of the Germans and fascists in Bulgaria?
When these thousands of students started their parade through the streets of Sofia, another parade organized at the Jewish synagogue, where a group of Jews said, "Let's protest in the streets and let's go to the palace and ask the king not to deport us, we are Bulgarian citizens." So hundreds of Jews, perhaps 1,000 or more, organized in front of this small synagogue in the Yuch Bunar neighborhood and started marching toward the king's palace.
Jewish demonstrators marched down several street blocks when suddenly they were confronted by a large police force. Armed police, plainclothes agents and mounted officers attacked the protesters and brutally beat them. Bellef special agents pursued and hounded the fleeing Jews. Hundreds were arrested.
This demonstration, I think that on the 20th or 24th of May 1943, the Jewish people, Jews, all wearing the yellow star here, and with the rabbi leading them, could almost reach the palace. I think that it speaks for itself.
The Jews of Sofia were not sent to the death camps. In the following days, the mass deportation of nearly all of the 25,000 Jews of the capital was carried out. Sofia was cleared as planned of most of its Jews, but the transports did not reach Poland. Even though the deportees were placed on trains, not one single train crossed the Bulgarian border. Instead, the Jews were sent to several provincial cities throughout the country.
Bellef planned to send to Poland all 50,000 Bulgarian Jews. Everything was prepared, and on the 20th of May 1943, Minister of Interior Gabrovsky was the boss of Bellef, went to King Boris to present the deportation plan for his approval. But in the last moment, they had second thoughts. Actually, it was the Germans, Dannecker, who feared that perhaps the Bulgarian king might do again the same thing he did in March. He was very worried about that. So they changed the plan into two plans. One was Plan A, was the plan for deporting the entire Jewish population to Poland, all 50,000 of them. Plan B, in case the king refuses Plan A, was to send the Jews from Sofia to deport them into the different provinces of Bulgaria. And that's what happened. Gabrovsky came to see the king. The king immediately said no to Plan A. And then Gabrovsky presented Plan B. And the king accepted Plan B for the deportation of the Jews to the provinces.
All of
my friends stayed in Sofia. When New Year's Eve, an event we used to celebrate, came, I really wanted to go to Sofia, but I was not allowed. Jews were not allowed to travel to Sofia. So my mother took me to the head of the county, who was an acquaintance of hers, and they went to high school together, and told him, "My son wants to go spend New Year's Eve in Sofia with his friends, please." On the spot, he took out a pass, filled it out, told me to get it stamped, and on December 31st, I got on the train, trying as hard as I could to hide my yellow star, until I arrived in Sofia. I celebrated New Year's Eve with my friends, and the next morning took the train back home.
On May 24th, King Boris was supposed to wait on the balcony of his palace for thousands of students to come and salute him, as on every 24th of May for years and years and years. But this day, King Boris was not there. Nobody knew where he was. He had disappeared from Sofia. Only a couple of years ago, we found out the truth by the publication of a small book by King Boris's driver, Sava Jevrev. And Jevrev tells in his story that a couple of days before the 24th of May, the king came, picked him up, took also his valet, and the three of them drove secretly to the king's hunting palace, and from there they climbed the mountain to the hunting lodge of the king, where the king hid for 3 days. He was very much afraid that he might be subject to a very strong pressure from Berlin to reverse his decision. So he wanted to be unavailable, so if the Germans tried to pressure him, they wouldn't be able to find him.
The fact that the Jews of Bulgaria remained in their country angered the Germans. On August the 15th, 1943, the German ambassador in Sofia received a strongly worded telegram from Berlin demanding the immediate deportation of all the Jews of Bulgaria to Poland. But the German ambassador, who had already gotten to know the Bulgarian people, sent a report to Berlin describing the reasons for the Nazi failure in Bulgaria. Bulgarian society does not understand the Jewish question. Partly raised together with Greeks, Armenians, Turks and Gypsies, the average Bulgarian does not understand the meaning of the struggle against the Jews, and the racial question is totally foreign to him. The Bulgarian does not see in the Jews any flaws that justify taking special measures against them.
The same report was sent by the Gestapo attaché in Sofia, meaning, what do you want to do? These people are different. They don't understand racism. They don't understand why they are supposed to hate the Jews. And this exactly expressed actually the entire Bulgarian spirit. And that was the answer made by a Nazi why Bulgaria is not going to deport the Jews.
On August the 28th, a few days after returning from a meeting with Hitler, King Boris died suddenly. The official statement by the royal palace in Sofia stated that the king had died of a heart attack. However, some historians believe that the king was poisoned after he rejected the Führer's demand to send his soldiers to the Russian front.
King Boris, by nature and by inclination, was a very cautious man. He was a politician enough to know that sometimes you have to accept losses, sometimes you have to victimize someone in order to achieve your higher goals. So I would say that he was prepared to make the Jews, to a certain way, scapegoats, so that the national interests of the Bulgarians as a whole could be safeguarded better.
Following the king's death, no further attempts were made to send the Bulgarian Jews to the death camps. Despite the fact that the German defeat was approaching, early in 1944 some 400,000 Hungarian Jews were sent to the gas chambers at Auschwitz. Over 100,000 Romanian Jews were murdered in death camps established in their country, and thousands of Italian Jews were loaded onto death trains departing for Poland. In Bulgaria, on the other hand, the living conditions of the Jews improved gradually and the restrictions were eased. Finally, in July 1944, the Bulgarian government officially cancelled the law for the defense of the nation. In September 1944, the German army hastily evacuated Bulgaria. The Red Army crossed the Danube. Bulgaria was occupied by the Russians and a communist government took power in Sofia. Prime Minister Filov, his Minister of the Interior Gabrovsky and many of their cronies were tried for war crimes and executed. Dimitar Peshev was sentenced to prison for his involvement in the pro-Nazi government, but was released from jail following testimonies by the Jews of Sofia and Kyustendil. He continued to live as an ordinary citizen, receiving a monthly pension from Bulgarian Jews who emigrated to Israel, and died in Sofia in 1973. Alexander Bellef attempted to flee Bulgaria. As fate would have it, it was in Kyustendil, of all places, that the commissar was shot to death by a Jewish partisan who recognized him on the platform of the city's railway station. Liliana Panitsa was arrested by the secret police. She was brutally beaten, tortured, and later tried. Thanks to the intervention of Jewish community leaders who testified as to her role in saving the Jews of Bulgaria, she was released, but died a year later at the age of 30.
One who understands what a civilized society is and understands the Jewish principle of he who saves one man's life saves the world, few are the people who actually thought it out all the way through. It's extraordinary. You save one man's life, the person next to you will save another life, and this way you save the whole of humanity.
From the Bulgarian people rose public figures who expressed the feelings of the people. It's to the credit of the Bulgarian people that there were those who started to fight.
I believe that the King Boris counted on the Bulgarians' love for the Jews. And with Parliament at his side and the Church, who had much influence, also on his side, and therefore he responded so favorably to the Bulgarian Jews.
The royal family, led by King Simeon, who at age 6 inherited the throne from his father Boris, went into exile in 1946, when Bulgaria went from a monarchy to a republic under communist rule. Bishop Stefan became the head of the Bulgarian Church after the war. 2 years later he was replaced by Bishop Kirill of Plovdiv. The two were buried side by side in Bachchovo Monastery, one of the holiest shrines of the Bulgarian Church, a shrine which serves to this day as a site of pilgrimage for thousands of Bulgarians.
Аз в Бачковския манастир имам един случай, моята братовчетка преводачка.
When I was ministering at the Bachchovo Monastery, my cousin, who is a translator, saw how her group of Bulgarian Israeli tourists came in and lit candles at the graves of Patriarch Kirill and Patriarch Stefan. So I asked them, "Why did you light candles? Since it is not in your tradition to light candles at graves." They replied, "They were our friends. We came especially from Sofia to honor their memory according to Bulgarian tradition and religion."
I feel that I owe a moral and personal debt to the Bulgarian people for acting in such a brave, unprecedented manner in order to save us.
The example of Bulgaria proves that when people wanted to save their Jewish population, they saved their Jewish population. And that raised the question, what would have happened if other nations, who had not 50,000, perhaps 500,000 Jewish citizens or more, had adopted the same brave attitude and said no to Hitler?
I can only say that we came to this country, Israel, from Bulgaria, 45,000 Jews without Holocaust complexes. Meanwhile, all the other European Jews, they and their children suffer from these complexes until this day. We do not have such Holocaust complexes.
In November of 1948, we left Bulgaria in a train of boxcars, which for this time were used for something positive. We were leaving Sofia on our way through Yugoslavia to board a boat which would bring us to our final destination, which was the new state of Israel. And I remember that night when we reached the border between Bulgaria and Yugoslavia. It was in a beautiful green valley, and the train stopped for the formalities of customs, and hundreds of Jews jumped out of the train to see this beautiful morning, and they all turned toward Bulgaria with their back to the border, and somebody started singing in the second one and third one, and all of a sudden had this huge choir of hundreds of people singing a wonderful Bulgarian song called Mila Rodino, which later became the Bulgarian national anthem. And it said, "Dear homeland, you're a paradise on earth. Your beauty and your charm are endless." And I looked at my father and my mother, and they were singing and crying. And I asked my father, "Why do you cry?" And he said, "Because we're living in a country which we love. This country has been good to us."
With the collapse of the Third Reich and the defeat of Germany, the Bulgarian Jewish community became the only Jewish community in Nazi-dominated Europe that increased in size during World War II. 49,172 compared to 48,565 Jews living there at the beginning of the war. An increase of 607 people, a natural growth of more than 1%. An impressive figure considering the 6 million Jews murdered in the death camps.